Have you ever wondered why we always hear about Mars as humanity's future home, but rarely anyone mentions Venus? Are we ignoring a viable option, or have we simply given up on a planet considered the most hostile in the solar system? After all, why not transform Venus instead of insisting only on Mars? Venus' atmosphere is suffocating, composed almost entirely of carbon dioxide, with dense clouds of sulfuric acid. To make matters worse, the surface pressure is about 90 times greater than Earth's, as if we were nearly a kilometer underwater, and the temperature, around 465 degrees Celsius 869 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead in just a few minutes, a true cosmic hell. But does this make the planet completely impossible to inhabit? Some scientists believe not. On the contrary, they argue that Venus, being very similar to Earth in size, gravity, and composition, could actually be easier to adapt than Mars if we find the right technologies. The big controversy is, should we invest billions to try to transform Venus into a new home, or is this just a fantasy too far from reality? And if it were possible, where would we start? Altering the atmosphere, reducing the temperatures, building floating cities in the clouds. And you, have you ever imagined what it would be like to live on a planet that today is compared to hell, but that tomorrow could become humanity's greatest survival project? If we want to transform Venus into a habitable planet, we need to think of radical solutions. And that's where some of the boldest ideas ever proposed by science come in. One of the most well-known would be to use gigantic space mirrors positioned between the Sun and Venus. These mirrors would reflect part of the sunlight, gradually reducing the planet's infernal temperature over thousands of years. But could something so gigantic really be built with our technology? Another fascinating proposal is to seed Venus' atmosphere with genetically modified organisms capable of converting carbon dioxide into oxygen and nitrogen. It would be like planting an invisible forest that, over time, could transform the chemistry of Venusian air. But here comes the big question: is synthetic biology really capable of surviving in such an extreme environment, filled with acid and suffocating heat? There are also those who advocate the idea of cooling the planet through controlled bombardment with icy asteroids from the Kuiper Belt. These impacts could release water and lower the temperature. But would such a violent process destroy any chance of a future for Venus? And perhaps the most intriguing proposal of all, not trying to inhabit the surface, but instead building floating cities in Venus clouds, where pressure and temperature are much closer to Earth-like conditions. Imagine immense suspended metropolises hovering above a sea of toxic clouds, but protected by advanced technology. So, among all these ideas, which one do you think could really work? Would Venus become humanity's next home in the clouds, or is it just an impossible dream? Even if we have bold ideas to transform Venus, the truth is that the obstacles are almost unimaginable. The first barrier is technology. Building giant mirrors in space would require materials and engineering systems we do not yet master. And what about floating cities? They would need to withstand supersonic winds and clouds filled with sulfuric acid. Could today's structures really survive such a hostile environment? Another critical point is time. Any cooling or atmospheric transformation process on Venus would not take decades, but centuries or even millennia. Would humanity have the patience and resources to sustain such a long-term project? And then comes the ethical question: should we really try to terraform another planet? Some scientists argue that altering Venus would be an act of arrogance, as if we were playing cosmic gods. Others say it is an inevitable necessity, since Earth may not be able to support us all in the future. But there is yet another dilemma. What if there are microscopic forms of life on Venus, hidden within the clouds? Transforming the planet could mean wiping out a unique alien biosphere. Would we be willing to destroy extraterrestrial life to ensure the survival of our own species? In the end, the question remains: how far should humanity go in its search for a new home? Are we ready to take on the responsibility of reshaping an entire planet, or have we not yet passed the test of taking care of Earth itself? When we think about the terraforming of Venus, we can imagine three main scenarios, and each reveals a lot about the future of humanity. In the optimistic scenario, Venus would become humanity's second home. After centuries of cosmic engineering, the hostile planet would give way to a habitable world, with artificial oceans, a breathable atmosphere, and futuristic floating cities under an orange-tinted sky. It would be the greatest achievement in human history, a symbol that we not only survived, but thrived in previously unthinkable environments. However, the pessimistic scenario is equally possible. The projects could fail catastrophically, wasting trillions in resources and perhaps even making Venus more inhospitable than it already is. Worse, the attempt to transform a planet could spark political divisions and wars for power, since terraforming involves technologies capable of determining the fate of entire worlds. Finally, there is the intermediate scenario. Instead of terraforming the entire planet, humanity might settle for floating bases or suspended cities in Venus clouds, exploring its resources without completely altering its nature. It would be a practical, less risky solution, but still revolutionary. And then comes the final question: is Venus' destiny really in our hands? We are facing a historic opportunity to expand life beyond Earth, but also a moral and existential dilemma. After all, terraforming Venus could be our greatest triumph or our greatest mistake.